My mom chose my stepdad and his kids over me, going so far as to kick me out of what I thought was my own home. But there's one major detail they conveniently forgot: I'm the actual owner of the house. Now, after being cast aside, it's time for me to take back what's rightfully mine and show them the consequences of their betrayal. I never imagined that my father's careful estate planning would eventually tear our family apart. There's so much to unpack, and I want you to get the full story, so let's start from the very beginning. I now work as a senior software architect at one of Seattle's major tech companies, exactly the kind of career Dad always envisioned for me. He used to say, "Technology is the future," and beamed with pride when I got accepted into UW's computer science program. Even though he wasn't a techie himself and ran a successful construction business, Dad had a real talent for spotting trends. When the recession hit in the late 1980s, he started his construction business from scratch, tackling projects that others wouldn't dare with nothing more than a pickup truck and his trusty tools. Mom used to tell me that back then they lived in a modest apartment and scrimped every penny, yet Dad never wavered in his vision. He often said, "The secret isn't just building structures, it's about building relationships." That mindset helped him push through the toughest early days. What set his business apart was the genuine care he showed for both customers and employees. Even if that meant losing bids to competitors who overpromised, he believed in honest pricing and realistic deadlines. "Build trust first, and the profits will follow," he'd advise. By the mid-1990s, his company had earned a sterling reputation for handling intricate restoration projects that required not only technical skill but also a deep respect for history, all thanks to the strong bonds he built with his clients and staff. During the 2008 financial crisis, when many construction companies were closing shop, Dad's business held strong. He didn't lay off a single employee. Instead, he slashed his own income to nothing and even took out a second mortgage on his beloved Mustang. Watching him manage that crisis taught me more about leadership than any management course ever could. He always reminded me, "Your employees are your extended family, take care of them, and they'll take care of your business." I didn't fully appreciate his management style then, but many of his ideas shaped my approach when I was promoted to team lead at my tech company. I started keeping detailed documentation for our code, much like he kept exhaustive logs for every construction project. That focus on relationships helped me steer my team through some of our toughest deadlines. I met Emily at a hackathon during my junior year. While she was busy planning the event and studying business administration, I was there, sleep-deprived and fueled by energy drinks, with a messy look but a deep love for code. Despite it all, she saw something in me. From the moment Dad laid eyes on her, he was smitten. "She grounds you. Once you share your first meal together, don't let her slip away," he would say. Dad even played a part in launching Emily's marketing firm. He introduced her to local business owners, showed her how he drafted contracts, and shared his business goals with her. "Success isn't just about what you know, it's about helping others succeed too," he'd remind us, always eager to pass on his wisdom during those formative years. Every Sunday, Emily and I drove to my parents' house for dinner. We'd gather on the back deck, built by Dad himself, and chat about everything and nothing while he fired up the grill. Even though he didn't always understand the technical details of my work, he'd ask thoughtful questions. Mom would lovingly roll her eyes and say, "There they go again with the computer talk." Dad's pride was our family home, purchased with the earnings from his first major construction job in the 1990s, a historic restoration that made his business famous in one of Seattle's older neighborhoods. The charming craftsman-style house boasted a wraparound porch and a garage he transformed into the most organized workshop imaginable, where every tool had its own perfectly labeled spot. He cared for that house as if it were a living showcase of his skills. Every renovation was meticulously planned and recorded, each repair, improvement, and paint job logged in a detailed spreadsheet. "A house is like a living thing," he'd say as he showed me how to clean the gutters or inspect the foundation. His routine covered everything from checking the roof after a storm to replacing air filters. He believed that neglecting the small details eventually leads to big problems. More than just a workspace, the garage was also his classroom. There, he taught me lessons that went far beyond the use of tools. With custom storage options and a workbench he built specifically for teaching woodworking, Dad completely renovated the space himself. "Every piece of wood has its own story," he'd remark while we arranged the pegboard with designated spots for each tool. It wasn't just about organization, it was his way of showing me that everything has a purpose and a story worth preserving. Our family treasured those weekends filled with life lessons. In that very garage, when I was just 12, Dad and I spent countless hours working on his 1967 Mustang. He had bought it for restoration, saying it would strengthen our bond as father and son. The car became our classroom for life lessons. His advice was always straightforward: always use the right tool for the job. Shortcuts may seem tempting, but they'll cost you in the long run. Though he could have finished the project in a year, it took 3 years because he valued the process over the end result. From those projects, I learned everything from project management to basic mechanics. We documented every component we replaced, snapped photos of every step, and kept thorough records. This isn't just about fixing a car, he'd say. It's about breaking down big problems into manageable parts. That lesson has proven invaluable in my work as a software developer. After Emily and I got married, we bought a small home just 20 minutes from my parents' place. Even though Dad insisted that we take out the mortgage in our own names, he helped with the down payment. You need to build your own credit history and learn to stand on your own feet, he explained. On weekends, as he helped with our renovations, he taught me how to install ceiling fans and patch drywall, preparing me for the responsibilities of homeownership. Around that time, my career was really taking off. I'd just been promoted to team lead, overseeing a group that built infrastructure solutions. I loved every minute of it, even though the hours were long and the pressure was high. Dad would often call just to check in, not about any specific issue, but because he understood the weight of managing a team. Remember to delegate, he'd say. You can't do everything yourself, just like I can't build a house alone. I remember when Dad first mentioned he was always exhausted during a conversation about starting a family. He brushed it off as just being overworked, despite Mom's constant urging to see a doctor. At the time, he was knee-deep in his biggest project ever, a multi-million-dollar development deal that was set to secure his business for the next 10 years. In hindsight, I wish I'd insisted he get checked sooner. Maybe things might have turned out differently. At that point, his business was expanding rapidly. Dad was branching out into more historical restoration projects across the Pacific Northwest and had recently opened a second office in Portland. He had earned a reputation for modernizing historic structures without sacrificing their charm. It's all about embracing the future while honoring the past, he'd tell his clients. Every achievement of his, from his professional successes to the restoration of the Mustang, was fueled by his passion for preservation. The Mustang became the focus of our last heartfelt conversation. He was excited about taking it to car shows now that the restoration was done, and he said, "Let's sign up for the Pacific Northwest Classic." His eyes lit up like a child's, and even in his final days, he kept planning for the future, always saying, "Show these youngsters what a real muscle car looks like." Then, one ordinary morning, everything changed. I was in a crucial meeting when my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, but I had to answer. Mom was crying, barely able to speak. Dad had collapsed at a construction site and was gone by the time I reached the hospital. The doctors said it was a sudden, severe heart attack. He was only 58. The weeks after Dad passed away were a blur of grief and red tape. The funeral was packed. People from every corner of his business and community life showed up. Suppliers, contractors, and even rival companies came by to share their memories of how Dad had helped them, offered advice, or simply been there when they needed someone to talk to. One seasoned craftsman even recalled that, despite his chronic illness keeping him off the job, Dad had made sure he stayed on the payroll. Your father always believed that business was about people first. The employees were heartbroken. Many had known him for decades. They told me things I'd never heard, like how he paid for a foreman's daughter's textbooks, helped another employee through a divorce, or stayed late teaching apprentices the ins and outs of historical restoration. With photos and handwritten notes from clients and staff, the conference room had been turned into an unofficial monument to his life. We were all amazed by how prepared Dad had been. Just a week after the funeral, his attorney, Mr. Anderson, called us in for a meeting. He pulled out a huge, meticulously handwritten accordion file titled Family Security Protocol. Inside were dozens of neatly arranged estate documents and detailed instructions for various parts of his land. Mr. Anderson even gave me a 3-day tour of Dad's paperwork. Each color-coded container came with personal notes outlining his choices along with the legal details. "I've never seen an estate plan this thorough in my 35 years of practice," he said. Dad had even included a 5-year business transition plan with backup strategies for different scenarios. After that, Mom started attending her church's bereavement support group, where she first met Steve, a 58-year-old facilitator who lost his wife to cancer 2 years earlier. At first, she mentioned him only in passing, but soon Steve suggested a healing book and reassured her that her feelings were normal. I was relieved she was getting support, though Emily reminded me that everyone grieves in their own way. Every Tuesday night, the church grief support group met, and before long Mom was joining church events with Steve. What began as casual coffee meetups after services quickly turned into lunch meetings and eventually dinner dates. Family friends began to worry about how quickly things were moving. At a family gathering, Aunt Jane pulled me aside, concerned that Mom was rushing into something to fill the void left by Dad. Mom's changes were becoming obvious. Her haircut was different, she dressed in a new style, and even the garden Dad helped create was gone. Whenever I asked about it, she'd say, "It's time for a fresh start." The woman who once spent hours reminiscing about her life with him now barely mentioned Dad. Soon enough, Mom announced that Steve would be moving in, just 6 months after Dad's death. His own grown children, James, 30, and Lisa, 32, felt that bringing him in would revive the house. I tried to be understanding, but it seemed like she was in a hurry to replace everything Dad had built. I'm now at a crossroads. How do I preserve Dad's legacy without sacrificing Mom's chance at happiness? Emily advised me to strike a balance, yet I can't shake Dad's own words in his letter, "Son, hold on to these memories." I apologize for the delay in this update and appreciate all your previous advice. It's been 3 months since my last post, and things have only worsened. Steve's once annoying domineering ways have now escalated. He acts as if he owns the house Dad left me. Last month, without asking, he started a major restoration project. One weekend, I found contractors dismantling the built-in bookshelves Dad had crafted for our living room, a final project we completed together before he fell ill. As if he were the boss, Steve directed them to dump all the old wood. When I confronted him, he snapped, "Listen, son, this house needs an update. Your father's style is outdated. We're doing you a favor by boosting its value." I reminded him that any modifications required my consent. Legally, Mom had agreed with him, but he just chuckled and added, "Your mother and I live here, we don't need permission to improve our home." Mom, who once cherished those bookshelves and displayed her antique teacups on them each Christmas, now treated them like clutter. I showed her Dad's detailed maintenance plans, but she dismissed them as relics of the past. Meanwhile, things with Steve's kids have taken a turn for the worse. James took over Dad's workshop and turned it into a CrossFit facility while I was away on business. During that time, he held a garage sale and sold most of Dad's tools, repainted rooms, and replaced Dad's lovingly refinished hardwood floors with modern vinyl planks. Lisa treated the space as if it were her personal design project. One evening after dinner, Steve pulled me aside and said, "Since we're paying to live here, we should have our names on the deed, it's only fair." I explained that there's no mortgage because Dad's planning paid for the house outright, and all maintenance, insurance, and taxes are already covered by me. Emily later suggested that we stop our weekly visits, arguing that no one benefits from the ongoing stress. But stepping back only made Steve bolder. He started sending bills for improvements I never approved, and these changes came more frequently. According to Mom's sister, I tried explaining Dad's intentions and my legal responsibilities, yet she accused me of clinging to the past. "Steve makes her happy, why can't you just let them make the house their own?" she asked. This week, I found out that the growth marks Dad had made on the kitchen door frame to record my height from age 3 to 18 were gone. Mom said, "It's just an old door frame, we can't keep every scrap just because your father touched it," when I asked about it. I now spend more time in Dad's old chair, the only piece of furniture I managed to keep in my own garage. Mr. Anderson has advised me to start considering long-term solutions. Legally, the house belongs to me, but I know I'll eventually face tough decisions about its future. When does playing the bad guy become more important than preserving your father's legacy, and how do you stand your ground when your whole family opposes you? Update 2. I appreciate all your advice on my previous post. The situation has reached a breaking point, and I finally made a decision that will likely change everything. Last week, I spoke with my financial advisor about the house. With nearby property values having risen by 40% in the last 3 years, we might earn enough rental income to fund Emma's future college expenses. During that discussion, I realized I had been so wrapped up in sentiment that I'd ignored the financial consequences of letting Mom and Steve live rent-free. When I raised this during our weekly call, Mom yelled into the phone, "You can't do this to us, this is our home, and Steve has worked so hard on it." She wouldn't listen as I explained that I was simply weighing my options. She kept talking about all the upgrades they'd made, completely ignoring that I'd never approved any of these changes. An hour later, Steve called, his tone uncharacteristically serious. "Listen, in this house, we've built a life. Just because you miss your father doesn't mean you can come in and undo everything," he interrupted as I tried to explain the financial issues, insisting that they now had real sweat equity in the property. I reminded him that the house legally belongs to me, that's why Dad left it to me. "Your father isn't here anymore," he shot back. "You have to consider the living." After discussing it with Emily and Mr. Anderson, I made my decision. The next day, when I arrived at the house, Mom and Steve were already at it, remodeling the dining room. They had started ripping out the original crown molding that Dad had specially milled to match the house's antique style. Seeing that made me even more determined. They have 2 weeks to find another place to live. I told them so, and Mom burst into tears, accusing me of being callous and harsh. While Steve tried to scare me by arguing with me about my unable to simply kick them out, he started listing all of their local connections, their jobs, their church, even their close neighborhood ties. Even when circumstances got tough, I kept my cool and stood my ground, just like Dad taught me. I told him, "This is my property, Dad left it to me for a reason, and I'm simply using my legal right as the owner." Steve's face reddened as he began itemizing all the money spent on upgrades. I explained that all those unapproved changes had actually diminished the home's historical value. When Lisa came home and joined the argument, things only worsened. Mom immediately used her pregnancy as an emotional weapon. "How can you treat your stepsister like this? She's about to have a baby," she cried. Even though Lisa's pregnancy is important to them, I made it clear that it doesn't affect my property rights, and besides, she isn't even my stepsister. Since that moment, the emotional manipulation hasn't stopped. Mom's entire family has united against me. Her sister, sobbing on the phone, insisted that our parents wanted to keep Mom safe. Meanwhile, Steve's brother, a local real estate agent, left messages about the tough rental market. To top it off, even distant cousins I barely know have chimed in with sermons on Christian values and family loyalty. What hurts the most is hearing family friends who've known me since childhood criticize my every move. Each phone call feels like another small betrayal. Some even claim that I'm damaging Dad's reputation in the neighborhood. But this isn't about cruelty or profit, it's about honoring Dad's wishes and protecting what he built. It's been agonizing watching them systematically erase his legacy. I covered all their expenses, let them live rent-free for years, and tolerated their unauthorized changes. Now, enough is enough. They have 2 weeks to come up with new plans, and I won't give in. Mom kept begging for more time while Mr. Anderson assured me that the law was entirely on my side. I've been more than accommodating. He's helping me draft an official notice to vacate, making sure every detail is documented properly. I realize this might paint me as the villain in everyone else's story, but sometimes doing what's right means making tough choices, just like Dad taught me. Third update, I truly appreciate all your support during this difficult time. This will likely be my final update. I set a strict 2-week deadline for Mom and Steve, and it's now passed. The past 2 weeks have been the hardest of my life, filled with guilt trips, constant emotional manipulation, and frantic attempts to change my mind. Every day, Mom tried every trick, oscillating between anger and tears, to get me to relent. One day she'd cry about how she once changed my diapers, and the next she'd shout that she sacrificed everything for me. Steve even switched tactics, suggesting we establish a formal lease and offering to start paying rent. But after what they did to Dad's house, I couldn't trust them to honor any deal. When I arrived at the house 3 days before the deadline, I found a crowd gathered on the front lawn. Mom had enlisted friends from church, family members, and even some of Dad's former business partners. They'd prepared statements about moral duty and family responsibility, a full-blown intervention. I listened as they criticized me for being an ungrateful son for nearly 2 hours. Mom's pastor spoke about honoring your parents, while Dad's old secretary tearfully recalled his generosity. Even my elementary school teacher showed up to remind me of the values Dad once tried to teach me. The most heart-wrenching moment was when Lisa stood up, cradling her pregnant belly, warning that stress could harm her unborn baby, all while Mom wept beside her and several church ladies glared at me. It was a master class in emotional manipulation. Yet, amid this ambush, something unexpected happened. I felt a deep sense of calm. Listening to people who hadn't even attended Dad's funeral suddenly claim they knew what he'd have wanted, I remembered his words, "Stand your ground when you know you're right." It was as if I could hear his voice guiding me. I rose to my feet and addressed the group, explaining how Dad had meticulously planned for our family's future and even built this house with his own hands. I showed them photos of Steve's unauthorized modifications, pointing out the historical features he ruined and the fine craftsmanship he replaced with cheap, modern fixtures. Then I read aloud a letter from Dad, detailing why he left everything to me. Some of his longtime business associates nodded in agreement as I recited his words on trust, accountability, and preserving his legacy. They truly knew him. Shortly after, the group dispersed. Some looked disapproving, while others offered quiet apologies before leaving without another word. Meanwhile, Mom and Steve returned inside. I waited with Mr. Anderson and a locksmith on the morning of the deadline, and even hired a security team, just in case the house was left empty. Eventually, the rest of their belongings were packed into Steve's truck. He even gave me one final jab, but Mom refused to meet my eyes as she helped Lisa into the pickup. With a sneer, he asked, "Are you happy with yourself? Your father would be so proud of how you treated your mother." I said nothing. Dad would have known. I realized he had planned for this very possibility. What other reason could he have had for being so explicit in his will? After they left, I wandered through the house and was shocked to see how much builder-grade material had replaced the original details. The painted finishes, the handcrafted woodwork we'd perfected on weekends, it was all gone. I'm not planning to pursue damages, but Mr. Anderson documented everything for any future legal needs. All I want now is to put this painful chapter behind me and focus on repairing what can be fixed. A few of Dad's old craftsman friends have already been contacted and are eager to help restore the features that were removed. For now, Mom is staying with her sister, and most of my relatives have cut off communication. Still, some occasionally call out my actions on social media. Steve's children continue to share heartbreaking updates about their struggling mother being forced out of her home, though with each post, fewer people seem to care. Through it all, Emily has been my rock. She reminds me of Dad's letter whenever I begin to doubt myself, echoing his faith in my ability to do what's right. One day, I'll tell Emma about her grandfather and the heritage he worked so hard to preserve, though for now, she's too little to fully understand what's happening. I'm determined to restore the house to its original state. I'm working with a restoration professional so we can preserve the spirit of what Dad built. Even if it won't be perfect, some things can't be undone. First, we'll fix up the workshop, the very place where I learned from him and where I want my daughter to study. Sometimes being painted as the villain in someone else's story is the price of doing what's right. I may never be able to rebuild all the lost relationships, but I can live with knowing I honored what Dad entrusted me with. As he used to say, integrity is about doing the right thing, even when it hurts, not taking the easy way out. I know he would understand. This is my final update. The house was finally mine, but it no longer felt like home. The silence inside was overwhelming, no arguing, no guilt trips, no forced conversations. Just me, the empty rooms, and the weight of everything that had happened. For weeks, I worked late into the night, repairing the damage left behind. I pulled up cheap flooring, carefully peeled away the paint covering Dad's handcrafted woodwork, and salvaged whatever original pieces I could. Dad's old friends kept their promise, showing up on weekends to help me restore the house. As we worked, they shared stories about him, things I'd never heard before. How he once spent an entire night fixing a neighbor's roof after a storm, or how he used to carve little wooden toys for the kids at church. With every repair, I felt closer to him, as if I was stitching his legacy back together. Meanwhile, Mom and Steve kept their distance. I heard through the grapevine that Steve struggled to find another house in their price range. Mom was still with her sister, and though she made no direct contact, she occasionally posted vague messages on social media about forgiveness and family betrayal. I didn't engage. I had made peace with my decision. One day, Emily found an old photo of Dad and me in the workshop. She held it up and asked, "Is Grandpa happy in heaven?" I paused before answering. "I think so, sweetheart." She smiled. "Then I want to learn what he taught you." That night, I sat alone in the workshop, running my hands over the workbench where Dad and I had once stood side by side. I realized something. I had spent so much time trying to preserve what he built that I hadn't considered what came next. It wasn't just about fixing the house. It was about using what he gave me to build something even greater. So I made a decision. I would turn the workshop into something more, a place where people could learn the skills Dad passed down to me. A space for crafting, for restoring, for remembering. I reached out to some of the local community members who had once condemned me, offering to teach woodworking to young apprentices. Slowly, the same people who had once judged me started seeing my intentions more clearly. Months later, I received an unexpected letter from Mom. It was short, just a few lines. "I still don't agree with how everything happened, but I do see that you loved your father. Maybe one day we can talk." It wasn't an apology, but it was something. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I placed the letter in the workshop drawer, right next to Dad's old chisels. Some wounds take time to heal, and I wasn't sure we'd ever fully repair what was broken. But just like the house, some things could still be rebuilt. For now, I was at peace. I had honored Dad's wishes, protected his legacy, and created something meaningful out of all the pain. As I stood in the workshop, watching Emma carefully carve her first piece of wood, I knew I wasn't just fixing a house. I was building a future. The end. I appreciate everyone's support on this journey. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more shocking real-life stories happening around you.